on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:06. It's O'Connor and Company on this first day of January. I know you're all heading to the gym, aren't you? You're all heading to the gym, or you're out for a power walk, maybe a ruck, maybe a run this morning as your New Year's Day resolutions are kicking in. Good for you. We're here to motivate you. Get out. No, you're just rolling out of bed with a hangover from last night, aren't you? Well, that's okay. Get to the gym. Let's go. We got those New Year's Day resolutions. We're going to do this together. It's O'Connor and Company here, live and ready to get your 2025 off to a great start. Coming up at 8:05, Steve Moore, and then at 8:35, Kerry Pickett of the Washington Times. It's Larry O'Connor with Hans von Spakovsky, which, listen, I made sure that I didn't drink too much last night or stay up too late on New Year's Eve because I knew that all morning long I'd have to say Hans von Spakovsky, and so far I've done it right.
Do you know how many problems I had with teachers throughout my entire educational career, especially in elementary school? They always had problems with my name. And, of course, they used to seat kids in alphabetical order. I don't know if they still do that. So I always was the last guy in the very last seat in the back of the room.
Yeah, V. There's not a lot of people with last names. That may be Walker. If Scott Walker was in your class, he'd be behind you in the class, too. He would be such a teacher's pet, too. He was literally a Boy Scout, that guy. O'Connor is always right in the middle. My biggest vexing moment on the first day of school in elementary school was they go through the roll call, and of course they would always say my name as Lawrence O'Connor, and all my friends would go, Lawrence. I'd say, it's Larry, please, as if Larry's that much better. But what about your friends on the playground? So did they have a nickname for you? There's a lot you can do with Hans and von Spakovsky.
They used to call me HVS by just using my initials. Ooh. So and sometimes they would call me the Count.
Yeah, I believe that. That is kind of you're more of a Viscount, I think, in my opinion. But yes, I think I like that. HVS is good. The notorious HVS. We might have to adopt that here. Last night, New Year's Eve, Mar-A-Lago was the place to be as a very glitzy black tie, red carpet affair was held. And of course, the host was also the guest of honor. That would be the president-elect and the former president, Donald Trump. If you get a chance, take a look at Trump and the First Lady, Melania, appearing there. I got to tell you, after 4 years of, I'm not great at criticizing women's fashion. I usually let Julie Gunlock and Patrice Onwuka and Mercedes Schlapp take up that job. But they all agree that Jill Biden, bless her heart, her sense of fashion and style just didn't cut it sometimes. I think that Julie likes to point out that she looks like she's wearing upholstery from one of the sofas in her childhood home half the time. Compare it to Melania Trump.
Yeah,
sorry?
Or a flower child in the 1960s in San Francisco. I mean, that was...
yeah, well, at least there was some cool vibe to that. This was, grandma dressing up like the flower child from the 60s. Melania Trump, though, I got to tell you, last night, this is one of the most stunning, beautiful dresses I have ever seen, and she is a stunning, beautiful woman. I wonder if the publishing industry is going to right the wrong of the first Trump term and finally honor Melania Trump with the kind of magazine coverage that most first ladies understandably, deservedly, and traditionally get. I don't know if it matters a lot to her, but it matters to me. It matters to our country that she's honored and respected, and she was treated so shabbily. You got to see how she looked last night, Hans. She's just so gorgeous.
Oh no, I saw the pictures, and you're right. But if you think the fashion industry is going to change, they're not. I mean, they are as politically partisan as MSNBC is. I mean, all you have to do is read the what's called the living section, the style section of the Washington Post. It's like you're reading the editorial page of the newspaper instead.
Yeah, you're right. Listen, there could be a change there. We'll see, at least in the magazine industry. They do like to sell magazines, last I checked. And if you put her on the cover, over half the country voted for them, and maybe they'll buy them. Meanwhile, let me predict this. The first magazine to do it, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, it will be one of the top selling magazines in their history. that might speak to the industry more than anything else.
Well, you're saying that capitalism and profit might overcome ideology? Really? Even in the fashion industry?
Call me a naive idealist, but I think they like their homes in Mallorca. Hans, there's another industry that secretly is actually very happy that Trump won the election, and that is, believe it or not, journalists and reporters, in particular reporters that cover the president, because they finally have a guy who talks to them. And that was the case last night. Donald Trump, while arriving on the red carpet, did his traditional stop, pivot, and walk over to the reporters, and impromptu, he started answering questions, something Biden never did. Or if he attempted to pretend he was doing it, it was always while he was standing under a roaring jet engine of Air Force One or right next to Marine One on the South Lawn. So you couldn't hear a thing he said, or he pretended that he couldn't hear you. But here's Trump. We're going to join this midway through. He was asked a question about Joe Biden, and you'll hear him refer to Biden. And then we'll just let this play a bit so you can hear what he had to say.
Hey, look, I wish him well. He had a chance to do it in the debate, and that didn't work out too well for him. That was, I guess, the reason that really led to his downfall.
What are you looking forward to in 2025?
Well, just great, a great year. I think we're going to do fantastically well as a country. We're going to bring it back. It has to be brought back. People are not respecting our country very much, and they're going to respect us a lot. I think a lot of progress has been made over the last 5 weeks. It's been pretty amazing when you look at what's happened. There's a whole light over the whole world, not just our country. There are a lot of very happy people.
By the way, I just want to, I find it hilarious. As you can see, the band inside the main room at Mar-A-Lago, this is outside under the portico at the red carpet as he just arrived. They saw him coming, so they start playing Hail to the Chief. And Trump just says, yeah, well, I want to talk to the reporters. So the band's still playing, expecting his entrance. And he, obviously just decided to preempt it and say, yeah, I'll answer your questions. And again, you like this about it. Now, listen, sometimes I think Trump talks to reporters too much. I wish he'd stop. But this is kind of a refreshing change from what we've been used to, Hans.
Well, it is, plus the fact that I doubt this president will spend almost half his time on vacation the way Joe Biden has. Yeah. Plus, Larry, am I the only one who thinks that the current spokesman for the Joe Biden White House has got to be the worst White House press spokesman in recent memory, taking into account all the prior Republican and Democratic administrations?
Karine Jean-Pierre has been the most god-awful press secretary. And, of course, she will be rewarded in the next couple of months, not just with a major book deal worth millions of dollars, but also I'm sure she will get a job as a PR person for some Fortune 100 company because that's how these things work. All right, a little bit more from Donald Trump, the president-elect, on the red carpet. He actually said some significant things about various issues, including the hostages currently being held in Israel, including the vote for speaker this Friday. You'll hear it in just a moment. First, though, you know what we do here at 6:15. I mentioned Ronald Reagan National Airport, and Hans, you sort of mentioned that this renewed feeling of hope and morning in America, and also sort of the elevated style, glamour, glitz, and bravado that is now accompanying this president on his way into the White House 19 days from now. It does sort of echo that moment when Reagan and his wife Nancy Reagan came into D.C., and really it was a pivot, a mood shift, a completely different way of doing business here in Washington for the executive branch, going from Carter to Reagan. And you do get that same sense with Donald Trump. I don't know if they're going to name an airport after him here, like they did Reagan, but you do get that sense with even from this moment last night at the New Year's Eve party in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, there's so many parallels to it. I mean, another one that is that, remember, Ronald Reagan came in and there were American hostages being held in Iran, and we have American hostages again, this time being held by Hamas, one of the worst terrorist groups in the world. Again,
funded by Iran.
A historical parallel.
And he addressed that in this little impromptu presser. Let's get right back to it here. This is Donald Trump last night off the red carpet.
Mr. President.
What's your message to those Republicans who are still not supporting Speaker Johnson?
I think they'll support Speaker Johnson. time in Washington, and I think we're going to get great support. He's the one that can win right now. People like him. Almost everybody likes him. Others are very good, too, but they have 30 or 40 people that don't like him, so that's pretty tough.
Are you calling members on his...
All right, so that was, there's a follow-up question here about the vote, but that was about Speaker Johnson, about the vote this Friday, and you heard what he said. He's going to get the votes, he's got the votes, and everybody likes him. That is one thing that's true. Even the people who are opposing Johnson for the speakership, and there's only a few who have spoken out, Massey of Kentucky, Roy of Texas, even the ones who oppose him for speaker say he's a great guy, and that's maybe that's his downfall. He's too nice a guy to be speaker, Hans, but that does, at the end of the day, actually mean something, I think, when it comes down to the vote.
Well, it does, but he's got a really tough job. I mean, yeah, he's got a majority. Republicans have a majority in the House, but I think it's going to be the narrowest majority in modern history. You lose 1 or 2 votes on anything, and you can't get it passed. That makes it very tough to lead the party and get through the kind of bills you want when you have almost party line opposition from the Democrats on just about everything, and it only takes a small handful of Republicans siding with the Democrats to lose on a vote. That's a tough job.
By the way, a couple of those seats that we lost just over the last couple of weeks because of those recounts in California. I'm thinking of Mike Garcia in Simi Valley. I'm thinking of Michelle Steele in Orange County. These are seats that normally and traditionally would have gone to a Republican, but lo and behold, look, they found the votes at the last minute, and they ended up losing.
Well, it wasn't the last minute. It was weeks and weeks and weeks after
later,
the election.
Weeks after Election Day. All right, a little bit more here about Johnson, and the follow-up question is, are you calling for Republicans to fall in line and vote for Speaker Johnson?
Are you lobbying members?
Well, if necessary, but I think really we're going to have a great time. We're going to get a successful vote. He's a good man. He's a wonderful person, and that's what you need.
Why'd you change your mind on H-1B visas, sir?
I didn't change my mind. I've always felt we have to have the most competent people in our country. We need competent people. We need smart people coming into our country, and we need a lot of people coming in. We're going to have jobs like we've never had before.
But sir,
all right, that question about H-1B visas, of course, coming after the mini dust-up that happened last week with Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk indicating that we need to increase the number of foreign workers in the tech realm. We're going to get into that discussion a little later, Hans, because Elon Musk was there yet again at Mar-A-Lago, right by the president's side, and he's trying to sort of nuance this. I don't disagree that we need H-1B visa employees. The problem is when it undercuts qualified and educated American workers who could very well do those jobs. And let's face it, the system has been abused to undermine higher-waged American workers in the tech field.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how long ago was it? Just a couple of years that folks from Disney, employees from Disney who were being fired, testified before Congress about how they were being forced to train their replacements, foreigners being brought in under that program. And why were they being brought in? Well, because they could be paid lower wages by that great company, Disney.
Yes, that's right. And they're beholden to Disney because if they leave Disney, well, then they've got to be deported. So it's nothing like having a loyal employee who, if they want to go work at Knott's Berry Farm in California or at Universal across the street in Orlando, not only do you lose your salary from Disney, but you actually lose your ability to work in this country. You're right, 100%. And they can't claim these are jobs that Americans can't do, Hans, because as you just said, they're literally being trained by Americans who had held those jobs ahead of time. All right, well, like I said, we've got more on that coming up and Elon Musk's influence, but here's a little bit more from this presser.
Sir, you changed your position. Sir, you changed your position.
Say it?
Do you plan to go to President Carter's?
I do. I'll be there. We were invited. I'd rather not say.
Have you spoken to President?
Well, I think we have great nominees. We're doing very well, as you know, and I think most of them are being thought of very highly, just about all of them. So I think we're going to do very well.
Have you spoken to President? You said that he was saying that you're meeting.
Well, I don't know. There's a traditional meeting. Some people would say we already had that. You know, we met a week and a half ago. But if it's appropriate, I'd like to do that. Yeah.
All right, there's a little bit more here, but you heard he did confirm that he will be attending the state funeral for Jimmy Carter. That's news that we didn't know. And then there was a question as to whether there will be another meeting with Joe Biden. He said, well, we sort of already had that, but if it's appropriate, we will have another meeting. A little bit more from this. I know the music is loud in the background, but I did want you to get the sense here of how this played out and the fact that reporters are not used to this behavior from a president of the United States because they've been blacked out by the Biden administration and, as you said, by the press secretary. So this is a new sort of way of dealing with reporters. And secretly, Hans, reporters like this. Secretly, they may not say it out loud, but they prefer Trump, certainly, to what they got with Biden.
Well, they may like it, but that probably is not going to change the very biased attitude that they have towards Donald Trump and conservatives in general that we've now seen for so long.
Oh, yeah, no, they'll still dump on him. It's 6:23. 6:37, O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in this first day of January of 2025. If you're on your way to the gym, good for you. If you're deciding to start your New Year's resolutions tomorrow because you partied too hard last night, good for you. Either way, I'm just glad you're awake and letting us be a part of your annual routine here on New Year's Day. And if you're celebrating the big Michigan victory over Alabama, good for you. Just don't tell Hans von Spakovsky about it. Apparently, he's a Roll Tide type. Hans, thanks for being here on New Year's Day, though.
Well, like I said, Larry, I can't think of a better way to start off 2025 than with you in the studio and previewing what's going to happen and actually looking back at 2024.
Well, I can think of one thing that'll make it better, and that's Steve Moore joining us. Our pal Steve Moore will join us at 8:05, talk about the economy and how quickly things can turn around. 8:35, Kerry Pickett will give us the inside scoop on what's going on in Capitol Hill with regard to the Johnson vote for Speaker. And in fact, that's where we're going to pick things up right now. To remind you, here is what President-elect Trump said on the red carpet last night with regard to the votes. This is cut 12, please, Michael. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Republicans who are still not supporting Speaker Johnson.
Say what?
What's your message to those Republicans who are still not supporting Speaker Johnson?
Oh, I think they'll support Speaker Johnson. I think we're going to have a great time in Washington, and I think we're going to get great support. He's the one that can win right now. People like him. Almost everybody likes him. Others are very good, too, but they have 30 or 40 people that don't like him, so that's pretty tough.
are you calling members on his behalf?
Are you lobbying members?
Well, if necessary, but I think really we're going to have a great time. We're going to get a successful vote. He's a good man. He's a wonderful person, and that's what you need.
Why'd you change your...
All righty. So you heard, once again, unequivocal support for Speaker Johnson. And when asked if he will pick up the phone and call to lobby some votes, he said, well, let's see. If necessary, maybe we will. All right. So it appears right now that there are 5 Republicans in particular that might need to get that phone call, Hans. We've got Victoria Sparks of Indiana. We've got Thomas Massey of Kentucky. And then we've got, the other 3 are regular guests on this show, Chip Roy of Texas, Andy Biggs of Arizona, and Andy Harris of Maryland. Harris, in particular, is also the chairman of the Freedom Caucus. So there's those 5 right now that are holding out in their support for Johnson. And by the way, the call to Chip Roy might not go very well because if you remember, just about 2 weeks ago, President Trump took to Truth Social and called Chip Roy a untalented guy who should be primaried 2 years from now. So how do you think this is going to work out behind the scenes?
Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, listen, I've known Chip Roy for a long time. He's a good guy. You know, he's constantly pushing very good, strong bills. So I don't think he ought to be primaried. On the other hand, I don't think right now is the time to have a fight over the speakership when we have to get the new president also certified as president. That's something that, you know, disputes like that could maybe be handled later, you know, in negotiations over bills coming up and so forth. But it's not a good idea, I don't think, to have a fight over the speakership when you've got one of the most narrow majority margins, and Democrats are going to be doing everything they can to take advantage of that.
So the holdouts will say this to you, Hans, in response. They'll say, now's the perfect time to do this because this is where we have the most leverage. If we're ever going to get anything, now is the time to do it because of the sense of urgency, because of the timeline. the deadline here, because they're pressed to get this handled and handled on Friday, the 3rd. Now is the time where we can actually get something for our vote.
I understand that too, and I think there are good intentions. I want to be very clear. I think there are good intentions on behalf of everyone involved here. Everyone involved is trying to find the right path forward to get the kind of laws, bills, and so forth passed that we need to get passed to put this country back in the shape it needs to be. And I mean, I'm baffled by this. I'm not really sure what can and should be done about this.
Well, this is one of those things, I think, and listen, this goes back, if anybody is an aficionado of the discussions of the Continental Congress that ended up ultimately agreeing on the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, they were wrestling with the same things that this legislative body is wrestling with, which is, do you sacrifice the perfect on behalf of the good? It was good to get the Declaration of Independence passed. It was necessary. It was required. It never would have happened if John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and some of the other founders had held the line on issues like slavery and some other issues that meant a lot to them, but there's no way they would have gotten the southern states in. And Ben Franklin famously said, all right, let another generation fight that fight. This is our fight. And the question is, there's no doubt that moving forward in an expedited way so that President Trump can come in without any sort of political drama behind the scenes, like a fight over the speakership that could drag out for many days, making Republicans look bad and ineffective. It's better to have Trump come in and be able to move his legislation in an expedited fashion without all of that drama, versus, people like Chip Roy or Thomas Massie who want the perfect candidate to be the speaker. They want well, you're not going to get the perfect. So the question is, do you hold out and mess things up because you don't have perfect? Or do you move forward and say, okay, we'll take good and we'll try to get perfect later?
I don't know. I guess I'd go back to when another new great president came in, Ronald Reagan, who always said it's better to get half a loaf than no loaf at all, and that was an important concept when you were fighting in Congress.
And let's not forget, he was fighting Tip O'Neill in a Democrat-led House of Representatives.
That's right.
Here's Speaker Johnson. This was on Hannity. I believe this is last night with Kellyanne Conway sitting in for Hannity, but he spoke of this.
I think we do, Kellyanne. I'm really humbled and honored to have President Trump's endorsement for Speaker again. He and I...
By the way, he was asked, do you have the votes? So his first answer there was, yes, I think we do.
Work so well together, so closely together, and we have a lot of big things to do. He recognizes that what we need right now, I think my colleagues recognize this as well, is a proven fighter and a true MAGA conservative, but also someone who can work with every single member of our very diverse House GOP so that we can get President Trump's priorities over the line. That's what's ahead of us. I think this could be the most consequential presidency and Congress of the modern era.
All right, a little bit more of what Johnson had to say last night and how this vote might shake down on Friday and whether there will, in fact, be major drama here with the holdouts. We'll get to that coming up in just a moment. It's 6:44.
Mark Levin, weeknights from 6 till 9.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
I'm really humbled and honored to have President Trump's endorsement for Speaker again. He and I work so well together, so closely together, and we have a lot of big things to do. He recognizes that what we need right now, I think my colleagues recognize this as well, is a proven fighter and a true MAGA conservative, but also someone who can work with every single member of our very diverse House GOP so that we can get President Trump's priorities over the line. That's what's ahead of us. I think this could be the most consequential presidency and Congress of the modern era because we have to fix everything, and it has to start on day one, so we can't waste any time.
Mike Johnson speaking about the idea that he does have the votes, despite the suggestion that there are 5 holdouts right now. He's saying confidently that he does have the votes and that he's proud to have Trump's endorsement. He said something else that, first of all, I think it's very smart for him to emphasize the endorsement and say, we need to get forward and move Trump's agenda. That is the key messaging here. And the underlying message in saying that is that anyone who doesn't vote for Johnson is standing in the way of Trump. And I think that that's a very smart, strategic, political message to send into this vote on Friday, Hans, don't you?
Oh, I know, I agree. But look, he's also absolutely right about they have to start on day one. I figure they've got about 18 months to get things done, to get things through that Trump needs to bring the federal government back under control before, as you know, the next election cycle starts for Congress. And look, things have gone very well in this election, but they've got to be concerned that they might lose control of the House when they have one of the narrowest margins of control in modern history. And the winning party in a presidential year tends to lose seats in the next congressional election. So they don't have a lot of time to get things done.
I mentioned three of these standouts, reported standouts, are also regular guests on this program. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why, because they are independent voices. They speak out. They criticize Republican leadership if necessary. It is Andy Biggs, Andy Harris, and Chip Roy. I believe Chip Roy is the key person here. He does actually. There are quite a few Republicans who respect him, like him, and it doesn't seem like he's necessarily always trying to grandstand to get attention, like some Republicans do. He said this, and I think this is. I'm trying to read between the lines here. You just said he's a good man. He proposes really good and sound legislation, and I think that his opposition right now to Johnson is coming from a principled position with regard to spending and deficits, and frankly with regard to trying to make sure that he has a certain level of influence in things going forward, whether that's on the Rules Committee or perhaps in another position. This is what he said to reporters yesterday about this. He says he doesn't think Johnson has the votes, but wait for it. He remains undecided. See, people are overlooking this. He didn't say he's against Johnson and he's going to vote no. He has not told reporters that he's a no vote. He said he's undecided. And so I think that's where we are. I think that there's a negotiation to be had here, and I think he needs to be convinced that certain things and certain procedures and certain, processes will be reinstated in the House to get back to fiscal sanity. And then he'll have the vote. Is that possible? Can we get to, I know this is in the weeds, but we're in D.C., and people in D.C. like the weeds. Can we get to regular order? Can we start passing appropriations bill the way we're supposed to instead of these giant packages that the Senate and Democrats love so much?
Yeah, that is a key thing. And yeah, look, putting folks like Chip Roy on the Rules Committee where they can help shape what is going on is really important. And getting back to regular order, look, that's so important in getting the federal government, getting its budget under control, getting back to the point where the House uses the budget to go after bureaucrats and others who are problems within the executive branch. You can't do that when all you pass are continuing resolutions, because then you don't have any control over those agencies.
And by the way, these continuing resolutions now date to the COVID era. So when you have a continuing resolutions just keeping the government funded at the current levels, that means you're funding all of this garbage that we've inherited from the pandemic. It's outrageous. We don't need all of these things that we're funding right now in continuing resolutions, but they haven't done the hard work of legislating and voting to get rid of that junk.
Right. And if they don't stop the overspending, the vast overspending, I mean, we could eventually bankrupt the American economy if we don't get federal spending under control. And we've seen that kind of thing happen before, when our economy basically collapsed in the 1930s. Anyone who thinks that can't happen, we keep running up our debt the way we are, and that is going to happen.
And everybody knows it, and nobody wants to deal with it. And I'll just say this, too, because, and again, I always hesitate because it is in the weeds, and other radio programs and radio stations, for that matter, and other media outlets don't really get into the details, but we have an incredibly intelligent audience here in Washington who gets this stuff. And this is supposed to be a preview of 2025 here on our New Year's Day show. So let me just tell you something. All of the things that Hans just laid out here in terms of our deficit spending, in terms of regular order, no more omnibus packages, actually having that. And by the way, real fast, Johnson should be commended. This last Congress, actually, in the last year, passed over half of their regular appropriations bills, something that hadn't been done for nearly a decade, even though John Boehner had promised it, going all the way back to 2010. They sent a ton of appropriations bills in regular order to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer let it die so he could have that continuing resolution showdown at the end of the year. Now we have a Republican as the majority leader in the Senate. They should be able to work together. All of these things need to get done, but I'm going to say the word, Hans, because I know it's, in the weeds, but it's going to be a word you're going to hear a lot this year: reconciliation. A lot of this stuff can only get done in the reconciliation process that only requires a majority vote in the Senate, not the 60 votes to break a filibuster. And they only have one crack at doing that, I think, this year, Hans. So there's going to be one big vote on a lot of these things that we're talking about that might actually bring fiscal sanity back.
Yeah, and fiscal sanity has to be the driving force of Congress, of the administration, all of which, by the way, will help on so many of the other issues that we're all complaining about, including a bad economy, inflation, high gas prices, high grocery prices.
Yep. I know that the rules in the Senate are arcane, but just remember that word, reconciliation. It's how a lot of major things get done. So you can bypass that 60-vote threshold in the Senate. They can't use reconciliation very often per budget year. But that's probably how we're going to see all of this shake down, with Republicans only voting. It's 6:55.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.